Many businesses, after they've been making sales, sending out invoices, receiving payments, and making deposits, also want to create statements. Statements are helpful for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it summarizes all of the transactions that have happened for a customer, and also it can be a nice little reminder if your customers have past due balances. What we need to take a look at before we get into statements is one little thing that has to do with the Peachtree system. And I mention it because some people are very observant when they're watching a course, and they will notice things change and they sometimes want to know why. If we look kind of in the center of our screen up near the top, we can see that our system date is currently September 2nd. Previously, we've been working through August. So of course a weekend happened and then the date changes automatically, and that's what you'd expect. I don't have a problem with that. That's something that's automated and we really shouldn't mess with it too often. But just to the right of this, I want you to notice that we're also still in accounting period 8, which is August of 2009. That could be potentially an issue. Generally, you want to be working in the current period. So even though we're going to discuss changing and closing periods in the last chapter of this course, I want to go ahead and change this so that we're working in the current period, which matches the actual system date. To do that, I'm going to double click, and in the Change Accounting Period dialog, I'm simply going to move down. Now by default, this lists 2 years at a time, so we'll move it from August to September. Then all we have to do is click OK. And Peachtree tries to keep me on top of all of those accounting things, so it says, would you like to print your reports before continuing? Again, we'll do this when we talk about closing, so I'm going to say no. And then it says, of course, that it found transactions and would I like to run an accounting review, and again, I'll say no, we'll do that as part of the closing process. And then we can see up at the top that we are currently now in period 9. Now, I did want to point that out here, and it's kind of in a strange place, just because people do notice when things change, and it's also part of your normal processes. As you're working with Peachtree, you will need to make sure that you're working in the current period. Now, to get back to our statements, let's go ahead and kind of run through a process here. We're currently in September, so let's just create a quick invoice and process that. I'll come down to Sales Invoices, do a new one, and we'll create a quick one for Susan Abernathy. Notice that the date is set for September 2nd, and we'll just sell her a couple of items. So a pretty basic transaction. Let's go ahead and move to the top, and let's go ahead and send this out. We'll refresh the list. See that Susan's is listed. We'll come to the bottom, and we'll run through the print process. And we'll say that it did process OK. And now we can simply close. Now that we have a transaction with an outstanding balance, we might want to send out a statement to our customer. We can use our Statements option to do that. I need to move all the way to the bottom right of my screen and scroll my window up because I'm not actually able to see the bottom of the center at the moment. You'll notice I have a couple of buttons that were kind of hidden down there. At that point, then I can click on Customer Statements and Print Customer Statements. Now, a customer statement is actually a type of form, so this brings up the Forms and Reports dialog box. We have already selected for us the Customer Statements category, and on the bottom we have 3 different forms to choose from. A regular statement, as some call it, a continuous statement, like if you were using a dot matrix or a pin-fed printer, or pre-printed statements. So if you already had statement stock, you would simply put that in the printer, and you'll notice that this just prints the data out of Peachtree. We're going to do a standard statement on plain paper, so we'll make that selection. And then over below the preview on the bottom right, we have a preview and print. Here we get to determine what type of statement we want to print and if we want to filter by any type of criteria. You can work with balance forward statements or with only open items. You can choose which items you want to include, those since the last statement, all of them, arranged, today, this period, this quarter, and so forth. We'll go ahead and say since last statement. You also can choose a through date, through whatever date you want to do. If you were running statements through the end of the prior month, but you weren't processing them until maybe the 5th or 6th of the following month, you could of course choose the end of the prior month. That would be a good example of using the through field. You also can choose to print details if they have sales or credit memos or if they have receipts for payment. That would show things, for example, like the check number that they wrote that would pay for a particular invoice. We've already chosen the form. We'll talk about customizing the form in a later chapter. And if we wanted to, we could also filter for specific customers. So if I wanted to make sure I was only looking for Susan, I could choose Susan only. Now, this is very common if you don't create statements on a regular basis, but maybe you're trying to clear up an account or provide some records for people who need to have the details. Don't forget that once you get all of this set, you need to come up to the upper right and click Refresh List. Then we get to see the invoices that meet our filters. Put a check mark next to the one that you want, and then you can simply print an email just like you did your invoices. We'll go ahead and run through that process. After they all print correctly, you can again acknowledge that by saying yes. Brings you back to your Forms and Reports dialog. We'll go ahead and just close that down. And that's all there is to printing statements. It really is a very simple process, but should be done on a fairly regular basis. Another part that has to do with statements is usually assessing finance charges. If somebody hasn't paid and they have an overdue balance, then a finance charge may be assessed. There's another button for this in the center. We'll go ahead and click on this. And it asks what your starting and ending customer are, or if you have a type mask and the date. We'll go ahead and leave those blank for now and just say OK. The Apply Finances dialog changes a little bit, and it's an important message, so I'm just going to read it. If you select No to applying the finance charges, you can still print or display a report that lists the calculated charges without actually applying them to the customer's balance. If you select Yes, the program is going to apply the finance charges to the customer's balance with or without a list of the finance charges. So you see, this is really just your option of what do you want to do. Apply the finance charges, yes or no. Print a calculation sheet, yes or no. And then do you want to print it or see it on screen? All of these are different features that you have. Now, obviously, because we have Susan, who just created an invoice and just created a statement, she's not going to have any finance charges. So this is when changing periods could be important. In order to kind of trick Peachtree into doing this correctly, we would need to go up and change our accounting period as well as our system date to make it think that time had passed, because obviously no finance would be charged on a current invoice or a current charge. I did just want to show you that this is the process, though. It's not very difficult, but you do have to remember that applying finance charges may have some legal ramifications, so check with your accountant or anybody else that may be important in making the right decision for your locality. If you're going to apply finance charges, you'll set up those defaults first, and then you'll go ahead and apply those on a regular basis. My other recommendation, not that it's legal advice because I can't give that, but it is that you have to be consistent. You really can't or shouldn't be charging certain people finance charges but not others. Just some of those business considerations. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. We have to do a report style. We'll go ahead and say Detail by ID. And if there were applicable finance charges, Peachtree would have applied those to all of the appropriate accounts in the appropriate amounts and then printed out a hard copy of those charges so I could review it. Again, a very simple end to the process of making sales.